Now, for more on the federal government's anti-corruption fight and an assessment of its conduct, we're being joined now by the Special Assistant to the President on Judicial Reforms and International Relations, Mrs. Juliet Ibeka-Kunwagu, and a lawyer, Mr. Kelechi Okparaku. They both join us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this afternoon. Now, let me begin with Mrs.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. I'll begin with you, Mrs. Ibeka-Kunwagu. Now, I understand you've been involved with review of laws to strengthen anti-corruption fights at institutional and legal levels in Nigeria. So, from your years of experience, what would you say is the peculiar challenge which Nigeria faces in the fight against corruption?
Well, thank you very much. What we know today is that since the president came in, there has been active effort to ensure that the fight against corruption remains on track, and that efforts are made to improve that process. Not just the law, because indeed we've succeeded in passing and enacting so many laws in the first term of the president. The Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit Agency Bill, for example, was passed in 2018. We have passed the Mutual Assistance in Legal Matters Law. We are reviewing several other bills. We have before the National Assembly today bills on process of crime. We've also introduced the Open Government Partnership, as you are aware, and that is what led to what we have today as open budget.
Just one moment, if I may butt in right now, just so I can get the response I was hoping to get. The question is, what do you think is peculiar to the corruption problem in Nigeria? What is the peculiarity of this fight against corruption in Nigeria?
Well, the peculiarity would be in terms of the fact that, as you fight the corruption, you are seeing so many cases. And I want to say that the cases you are seeing are probably based on the fact that there is constant effort to deal with the problem. Because we've opened up the space, because there's so much interaction with the citizens are reporting more cases, and we are seeing also increased effort by the agencies to deal with that problem. Some people may look around and say, oh, nothing is happening. And yet so much is happening, so much effort in investigation, prosecution, in the asset recovery process to ensure that when those assets are recovered, nobody can use the same asset to commit more crime. Right. So I would say the thing is increased reporting, but it requires then more funding to deal with the problem.
So let's bring in Mr. Okparaku briefly. Now, the UNDP says that funds lost to corruption in developing countries are estimated at about 10 times the amount of official development assistance. So simply saying that if these funds were not misappropriated, then developing countries would actually be developed right now. So coming to Nigeria, with this sort of revelation, from what you have seen, do you think we're dealing with corruption as objectively and as vigorously as we should?
Thank you very much. In answer to your question, I would say not much. Yes, we have made some progress. That cannot be denied since the advent of this administration. But there is still an albatross which is bogging down on the fight against corruption, and that is political interference and the use of the fight against corruption as a political tool, especially against the enemies of those who are perceived as enemies of the government. And we have seen a spike in that since the advent of this administration. In fact, former senator captured it very well when he said that when it comes to the fight against corruption, the president seemed to use the deodorant for people who are around him and then insecticide for those who are against him. And there are a lot of instances have buttressed this fact, that we see that the administration is more inclined to using the fight against corruption as a political tool and to persecute people who are perceived not to be in their good books. And that is what has continued to chip away at the gains that the EFCC especially and the ICPC are making. And they have found it difficult to extricate themselves from this, the appendage, being the appendage of especially the executive, and then in using the tool, the fight against corruption as a tool for political vendetta.
Right.
And that is the greatest problem we have. And I know that is a work in progress.
Okay.
But these agencies need to understand
Okay, Mr. Okparaku, before we get to that,
the law has...
Mrs. Ibeka-Kunwagu, I'd like you to respond to some of the issues Mr. Okparaku raised earlier about using this anti-corruption fight as a tool against opponent. And then there's also the human rights quotient. I'm sure you've seen the reports making the round about the convener of Revolution Now protest and the statements made by the Nobel laureate, Professor Wole Soyinka. I'd like you to wade into that. First, respond to Mr. Okparaku's statement, and then the human rights quotient of Nigeria.
Well, let me start by saying it's really wrong for people to relate the fight against corruption to politics, because the question really was the crime committed? And that's the fundamental question. If the crime is committed, then where is the politics of that? Some of the cases that EFCC prosecuted recently and some of the convictions of former governors are people whose prosecution started in 2007. And so if the cases were concluded now, it's because there is effectiveness and there is non-interference. Because if the non-interference occurred since 2007, and suddenly in 2019, 2018, we're seeing conviction under this administration, I think we need to give credit and recognize that so much work went in by those agencies after 12 years, and you succeeded in convicting an individual who was a former governor. I'll leave it at that and say that we should really begin in this country to look at things dispassionately, whether it's from a particular zone, whether the individual is Igbo, Hausa, or Yoruba. The fundamental question, and this is what the courts consider, is whether the crime was committed. The courts do not look at individuals when they take decisions on this matter. The independence of those agencies cannot be compromised. And if they were really not independent, then what then would happen is that the interference would be such that you cannot succeed in prosecuting them. You cannot succeed in prosecuting individuals who are high-profile persons. And having said that, I just want to add briefly on the other issue you talked about. Human rights, just starting yesterday, the Human Rights Commission have been discussing the issue of Nigerians' capacity to deal with human rights issues. That discussion is going on as we speak. And I think let us allow the Human Rights Commission to finish that and come up with their report. Then we know exactly what is going on. DSS is also investigating what happened in the court, as you are aware. And we are waiting for the report of that investigation.
All right.
I want to leave that conversation there.
I understand. So let's, on a final note, I'd like to ask Mr. Okparaku. Now, there's been this request for a public register for high-ranking officials facing corruption charges and those convicted of corruption since 1999. What do you think about that? Do you think that would solve some problem which we're facing right now? Is that the right way forward?
Well, certainly that would be a nice idea, but maybe just for deterrence and what they call name and shame. But I don't, the real essence or the real impact to be made when these individuals are brought before the law courts and dispassionately, and they have their day in court, and if found guilty, sentenced to spend some time in prison. Just to add to what the Honorable Special Advisor here said, we have seen repeatedly instances in which the government actively have gone on its way to give an impression that they give tacit support to members of their own who are accused of corruption. I'll give you an example. It was possible for the EFCC, for example, to investigate the former governor of Ekiti State, who, even when he was in power. Yes, he enjoyed the immunity under the Constitution. But what happened with the Ganduje case? Nothing has been heard about it. We saw an individual on the eve of the election, a bullion vans entering his house. Nigerians asked questions, and they said, we have not received a petition. Now a petition has been submitted. And there are several other cases. I can go on and on.
Well, I guess as it stands now...
we are in this country when somebody became a minister. Yes, and it was proved that she forged a certificate, and the person was scurried away.
I understand. You know, as it stands now,
the Ikoyi billions.
I understand.
There are so many questions.
Because of our time, I know as it stands now, all eyes are on the anti-graft agencies, and you know we wait to see what will be the outcome of these investigations, if indeed they have started. But I'd really like to thank you so much, Mr. Kelechi Okparaku, a legal practitioner. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the program this afternoon, and Mrs. Juliet Ibeka-Kunwagu. You're welcome, the Special Assistant to the President on Justice Reform and International Relations. Thank you for your thoughts. Well, that's our package for this hour. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can always watch this episode and other episodes on our YouTube page. Our channel is at Channels Television. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm Kayode Kikulu. Have a great day ahead.